Economics operates as an information processing system. It tracks the collision between expanding human desires and the fixed boundaries of physical resources. This diagram illustrates opportunity cost. Every allocation of capital destroys the next best alternative. Building a billion-dollar hospital creates a hidden expense, the motorway that now cannot exist. Early attempts to solve this allocation problem relied on moral philosophy. The ancient Greeks coined the terms oikos for house and nomos for law. Plato proposed coding society through centralized property control, arguing that allowing the ruling class to own private wealth would inevitably corrupt their decision-making. His student Aristotle offered a counter-argument. He observed that communal property is universally neglected. When resources belong to everyone, no single individual takes responsibility for maintaining them, a phenomenon known as the tragedy of the commons. For centuries, thinkers from Aristotle to Thomas Aquinas analyzed trade strictly through a moral lens. They viewed money as a barren exchange mechanism. Charging interest on a loan, known as usury, was condemned because money itself could not physically reproduce. This early economic operating system was designed to maintain social order and enforce religious morality. It sought to restrict the movement of money to maintain stability, not to generate growth. By the 16th century, European empires adopted mercantilism. They treated global trade as a zero-sum game, believing that national wealth was the sum of hoarded gold and silver extracted through protectionist tariffs and colonial monopolies. A group of French thinkers known as the physiocrats rebelled against this hoarding mechanism. Led by François Quesnay, they argued that agriculture was the sole source of net new wealth. In their view, making furniture merely changed the shape of wood, while a seed in the ground actually multiplied. This diagram shows Quesnay's tableau économique, the first macroeconomic model. It maps the economy as a circulatory system, where wealth flows continuously between farmers, landlords, and artisans. Quesnay argued the state should remove controls and leave this natural flow alone, a policy called laissez-faire. In 1776, Adam Smith shifted the architecture of prosperity. He measured wealth by the total goods and services produced, rather than a stockpile of gold. Smith argued this production was driven by the invisible hand, the decentralized, self-interested choices of individuals acting in free markets. This animation illustrates Smith's core engine of efficiency, the division of labor. A single worker handling every step of pin manufacturing might make 1 or 2 pins a day. If a factory shatters the process into 18 specialized tasks across 10 workers, they can output 48,000 pins in the same amount of time.
19th century industrialization generated vast fortunes for factory owners, while thousands of workers were subjected to brutal hours, child labor, and soot-choked cities. Utopian socialists like Charles Fourier proposed passion-driven communes. Karl Marx demanded a systemic teardown. He argued the conflict between the capital-owning bourgeoisie and the laboring proletariat required the destruction of private property. This timeline visualizes Marxist labor theory of value. A factory worker might produce enough bread to cover their daily wage in just 3 hours. The remaining 5 hours of labor generate surplus value. Marx modeled this surplus as exploitation, directly extracted by the capitalist to fuel their own wealth. Decades later, Vladimir Lenin expanded this critique to a global scale. He argued that to delay its collapse, capitalism required imperialism, seeking foreign markets to extract cheap labor and raw materials once domestic populations were exhausted. The 19th century ended with a bifurcated architecture: optimize the machine for capital accumulation or dismantle it for labor equality. Economists responded by zooming in. The marginal revolution discarded the idea that value comes from labor. Thinkers like William Jevons and Alfred Marshall showed that value is subjective, determined by individual consumers making micro-decisions at the margin. This graph plots diminishing marginal utility. The first pizza slice delivers a massive satisfaction spike. By the 4th, the benefit flattens. The 8th creates physical discomfort, driving utility negative. Prices settle where declining desire meets seller supply. This new model highlighted market imperfections. Arthur Pigou identified externalities:
costs forced onto third parties, like a factory polluting a river it doesn't own. Others noted that companies use branding to create monopolistic competition, selling identical products at different prices by manipulating consumer perception. Following the Russian Revolution, the Soviet Union attempted to run an economy without these market dynamics. Central planners in Moscow tried to manually calculate the production quotas and resource allocations for millions of citizens, leading to chronic shortages and industrial bottlenecks. This split screen illustrates the economic calculation problem. Left, a central planner operates blindfolded. Right, a free market relies on prices acting as flashing binary signals. If copper becomes scarce, its price rises. Millions instantly adapt, finding substitutes without needing centralized command. Free markets triumphed because prices function as a decentralized computational language, processing the reality of scarcity faster than any human bureaucracy. Then, the decentralized algorithm crashed. During the Great Depression, a quarter of the American workforce was unemployed. The classical rule that supply automatically creates its own demand broke down, leaving factories idle and millions starving. John Maynard Keynes diagnosed the failure. He realized that economic decisions are not purely rational math. They are driven by animal spirits, waves of optimism and fear. When fear grips a society, people hoard their cash, and the entire system seizes up. In the Keynesian bathtub, water level is total economic activity. When citizens save, water leaks out the drain, and the economy plummets. Keynes argued the government must intervene. By funding public works, the state turns on a faucet, pouring fresh capital to restore the level. Friedrich Hayek viewed this intervention with alarm. In The Road to Serfdom, he argued government planning forces citizens to comply with a single, centralized vision. Economic control, he warned, inevitably mutates into totalitarian political control. Keynes provided the governing logic for the post-war boom. However, by turning the state into the market's mechanic, he blurred the line between economic engineering and political power. By the 1960s, governments believed they could precisely tune the economy using the Phillips curve. This model presented a menu: tolerate slightly higher inflation to keep unemployment low, or accept higher unemployment to stabilize prices. In the 1970s, the menu caught fire. The economy suffered stagflation, a combination where economic growth stagnated, unemployment rose, and inflation skyrocketed simultaneously. The Keynesian framework had no answer for a bathtub overflowing with boiling water. Milton Friedman mounted a monetarist counter-revolution. He argued that inflation is strictly a monetary issue, caused by central banks printing too much money. In the quantity theory of money, imagine an island growing 100 pineapples. A $20 money supply circulating 5 times prices each pineapple at $1. If the central bank injects another $20, the crop remains $100. Prices simply flip to $2. Friedman called this money illusion. James Buchanan applied this skepticism to politicians themselves through public choice theory. He noted that elected officials are eager to execute the spending half of Keynesian economics during a recession, but refuse to raise taxes or cut spending during a boom, because austerity costs votes. When the state intervenes, its decisions are governed by political survival. Continuous deficit spending generates long-term inflationary damage rather than generating structural growth. The architecture of classical economics relies on the existence of a perfectly rational human. Economist Amartya Sen challenged this premise, arguing that raw GDP growth fails to measure actual human well-being. During the 1943 Bengal famine, Sen witnessed a Muslim laborer named Qadr Mia stabbed to death in a hostile neighborhood. Mia knew the risk, but his family was starving. Sen used this to formulate his capabilities approach. Extreme poverty is a deprivation of freedom. True wealth is the capability to choose a safe, meaningful life. George Akerlof exposed another flaw with the market for lemons. When a seller knows a used car is defective, but the buyer does not, this asymmetric information causes buyers to lower their price offers. Owners of good cars leave the market, leaving only the defective lemons, causing the market to collapse. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky proved our mental wiring is mathematically irrational. Through concepts like loss aversion, They demonstrated that the pain of losing $50 is significantly stronger than the joy of finding $50. Furthermore, simply changing how a statistic is framed shifts human decision-making. Homo economicus, the rational, calculating agent that economists relied on to balance their equations, is a mathematical phantom. If human actors are irrational, the system they operate will compound their errors. Hyman Minsky proposed the financial instability hypothesis, summarizing it in 4 words: stability breeds instability. This meter shows Minsky's 3 stages of debt. After a crisis, banks engage in safe hedge finance. As confidence returns, they shift to speculative finance. Finally, they enter Ponzi finance, where borrowers take loans they cannot repay, betting asset prices will rise forever. When asset prices stall, the debt structure shatters. In 2008, the global economy hit this wall, the Minsky moment, triggering a collapse driven by over-leveraged mortgages. These crashes disproportionately impact the working class. French economist Thomas Piketty analyzed centuries of data to prove that severe inequality is a feature of capitalism. This visualizes Piketty's formula: R is greater than G. The rate of return on capital historically outpaces overall economic growth. A laborer runs endlessly on a slow treadmill, while an asset owner stands perfectly still on a rapidly ascending escalator. Without external structural correction, modern capitalism is programmed to concentrate wealth upward and periodically crash under the weight of its own debt. Recognizing these systemic flaws has evolved the discipline. Modernists who build bespoke algorithms to solve specific allocation failures. This node map shows Alvin Roth's kidney exchange. Because buying organs is illegal, Roth designed a matching algorithm. It scans incompatible donor-patient pairs and finds a closed loop of matches so strangers can swap simultaneously, clearing the market using code. Paul Klemperer applied similar engineering to auction theory. When governments needed to sell mobile network spectrum, telecom companies previously colluded to keep bids low. Klemperer designed mathematical rules that neutralized the collusion, generating billions in state revenue. These engineering principles are now aimed at climate change. William Nordhaus defines it as a double externality. It spans geography, pollution from one nation destroys crops in another, and it spans time, forcing future generations to pay for present-day emissions. The engineering solution is carbon pricing. Rather than attempting to micromanage millions of factories, governments apply a financial cost to emissions. Internalizing the cost of pollution forces the market's decentralized algorithm to solve decarbonization on its own. Economics is an evolving operating system. Its architects must now optimize the system not just for raw output, but for human capability and planetary resilience.